First off, Kerrie, thanks for joining us. Kerrie Leonard. What club are you shooting with, Kerrie?
So I am with Blackheath Archers, and then I also shoot with Drewstown, but I'm a member of Blackheath Archers.
Okay. How long are you shooting?
I've been shooting for quite a long time, but consistently probably 11 or so years.
Brilliant, brilliant. What category do you shoot?
So it's a little bit different for para archers. So where you have quite an open field with recurve and compound and field and these kind of categories. With para archery, you have W1, which is a category where if you have a disability and you have 3 limbs affected, you shoot in that category. And then there's a W2, which is seated archers who aren't as impaired, and then standing archers. So I'd be a W2, except that they've combined both W2 and standing into an open category. And then within that, there's recurve and compound. So I'm women's open compound.
Okay. Could you maybe tell us a little about your bow setup, the make of your bow, what equipment you have on it, stabilizers, sights, rests, all that kind of thing?
So I'm shooting a PSE. So compound is my category. I'm shooting a PSE and currently using an axle sight, but that's going to change pretty soon. For no other reason than I'm just not confident in it, and I'd rather it's affecting how I shoot. So I'd rather be confident in the equipment that I'm using. And then from a stabilization point of view, of course, it's got to be carbofast.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And what arrows do you use, Kerrie?
So I use X10s. They're a 620 spine, and I tend not to shoot indoors. I tend to shoot outdoors, but I did shoot some indoor competitions this year with those X10s. So trying to shoot those against other archers that have a much thicker arrow is challenging. But listen, it's all about getting practice in before my summer of competition.
Absolutely, absolutely. Do you mind me asking, why or how did you get started in archery?
I don't know if it's the most PC answer to give, but I got started in archery because I'm in a wheelchair. I have a disability. I was injured when I was 6. And I've tried basically every sport, and my family is quite sporty as well. And my uncle knew somebody in a wheelchair who did archery, and so Christy Kelly, actually from Summerhill, who's no longer with us, and because there was that connection with a disability, then I went and I tried archery with him in Kilcock, I believe. And then there was a club in Drumree for a while, and I don't live too far from that venue. So I shot there when I was in secondary school. And then I went off to boarding school and gave it up for a number of years. And I also had an operation on my back. So I came back to the sport in college.
You've persisted with it obviously since then.
Yeah, it's kind of a funny thing. So I didn't really have any ambition to do it as competitively as I have gone on to do it. I just did it as a sport for something to do. I actually only signed up because the person I knew just needed sign-ups for the club so that they could get funding from the college. And then I dropped out of college and I just needed something to do because my brain doesn't function well when it's not occupied. So I just started going to the club, even though I wasn't in the college anymore. And during the year where I dropped out, I was asked if I'd like to participate at a competition. At the time, para archery was still governed by the Irish Wheelchair Association. And so the opportunity came up to go to my first competition before London 2012 in the UK. And so I did the sport just then, I came back to competition, and then I spent that summer working at the London Olympics and Paralympics. And when I came back to Ireland, I started doing it more competitively. Went to my first Europeans in 2014, and it was an absolute disaster. Quite honestly, I finished second last or something. It was terrible. And really, the only motivation for me to go on was that I didn't want that to be the last result that I'd ever done at a competition. And so the World Championships were in 2015, and I was graduating at the time. So I went to the World Championships just to have a better result than my first Europeans. And I finished ninth, and the qualifying standard for Rio was eighth. So I just missed out just by a hair. And at that stage, I decided I wanted to continue on and try to qualify for a Games.
Okay. Kerrie, when it comes to a big event, how do you prepare for a big event? I know it's a very open question, but...
Practice is a good way to start.
Yeah.
It's true. Actually getting the work and using the bow is important. But I do quite a lot of psychology work, and I work with a sports psychologist to prepare for competitions because I work full time. I've got a lot of things that distract me. And so making sure that my brain is not the thing that hinders me in competition is quite important.
Of course. Would you follow like a regular archery training program? Would you modify or intensify any certain aspects of it as the competition season approaches?
You do. I tend to fall into being a weekend archer, so Fridays through to Mondays. I think because of COVID, it's been helpful for balancing your life. In a lot of ways, it's made it more complicated, but I bedded in that quite well before I went to the Tokyo Paralympics. And so, yes, it does like intensify the closer you get to competition, but it's important that you've worked out your peak and your trough. And working with Jim Conroy, who's my coach, we do a series of periodization training so that we're intensifying closer to competition, but making sure that we're not boiling over and peaking too soon.
Maybe even just right before the competition, or any kind of little rituals or little habits that you just stick to, even if they're just kind of minor little, say, psychological quirks or little things like that, just little routines or rituals that you have that you just need to do this before the competition.
Yeah, when I'm at the competitions themselves, I do make sure that I have a full face of makeup, which seems ridiculous, but it was a joke to start with, and then it became a habit and a routine and ritual that I had to do at the start of every competition.
Okay. When it comes to a difficult competition, and maybe it's not going to plan and the pressure starts building up even during the competition or even just right before the competition, do you have any way of dealing with that, or is it just a question of just kind of pushing through?
It is the case of pushing through. You do a lot of work, and I have a lot of processes for resetting. But any number of things can happen. You can be an extremely windy day, one that you haven't experienced before. You could be sick. You could just be feeling off and not have that. I personally like a burst of adrenaline to come before competition, but I find the more competitive I've been over the last couple of years, the less likely that is to actually come along to help me. So you need to follow your processes and trust that you've done the work and it will pay off in the end.
Could you we move on to maybe listing some of the international competitions you've been to, maybe some of your achievements to date?
Sure. So I've been to the World Championships in 2015, 17 and 19. So what's that? Germany, Beijing and the Netherlands. And then I've also been to the Europeans that were qualifiers for games. So the qualifier for Rio, which was in France, and then for Tokyo, because of the COVID situation, we didn't have a European championships. So at that stage, typically the final qualifier for Paralympics is in the Czech Republic or Czechia. in Nova Mesto, so I've been to that a number of times. Finished ninth twice at World Championships. I've finished second at European qualifiers, and I suppose the biggest and proudest moment to date is finishing ninth at the Tokyo Paralympics.
Brilliant, brilliant. For this year, even though like it's well underway, and obviously the indoor season is coming to a close, if not already completely closed, what's your plan and your schedule for this year, for 2023?
So this year it's all about qualifying for Paris, and I have already achieved the qualifying scores for the World Championships, which will be in Czechia in July, and the European Games, which will be in Rotterdam in August. So that's what I'm targeting for the summer.
So that's obviously answers my next question, the big one that you're working towards, which is obviously the Paralympics. And you mentioned also that you work closely with Jim Conroy. I know Jim myself as well. He's helped me out a couple of times. What's that like? Maybe you could describe some of his coaching techniques or how he's helped you.
Yeah, Jim's fantastic. You know, when it comes to someone who's been there and done that, he's qualified for his own Olympic Games and represented the country at that level, which is phenomenal, especially with the sport that we participate in. On top of that, he has been the quote unquote para coach for God knows how long. You know, he definitely he's been there through all of the athletes who qualified for Paralympic Games, and so his commitment to the sport is huge. On top of that, you know, there's not a lot of negativity when you train with him either. He wants the best for you and will push you to get that, but it doesn't tend to get sour or difficult to work with him. We also have very similar personalities, so I think that works quite well for us. And because we've worked together for so long, he understands when I'm not executing my technique the way it needs to be, and he can, you know, point that out very quickly given his experience. And he's just, I've just enjoyed working with him from the start.
Brilliant. Are there any, I suppose, ongoing or persistent, and we all have them, bad niggling archery habits that you're trying to break?
I think for me, it's always just a fitness thing. You know, provided there's confidence in the shot, then your muscle memory kicks in. And yes, people can point out things that you're doing right or wrong, and that helps. But for me, when when my world outside of archery starts taking over, it detracts from the amount of training I can do. At the moment, thankfully that's not an issue. Everything is fit and ready to go. But certainly after coming back from Tokyo and needing that mental break, because you have something called the post-games blues when you do compete at such a high level. I took 6 to 8 months off, and it was very difficult to get back into routine and get fit for what I need to do this summer.
Okay. And like that, for those, say, climbing the archery ladder and if they're working towards a goal, is there any advice you throw at them or you give to them, like especially when they're working towards like a goal?
It's an interesting one. I certainly didn't start in the sport to qualify for games. I did it as a distraction, but I see a lot of archers who, you know, train on their own and plateau quite quickly. I think you don't need to be qualifying for games. You don't need to have some lofty goal or ambition, but I do think it's important as soon as you're ready and able to enter yourself into a competition, whether you just request that the organizer puts a target at 20 meters for you and lets you shoot. just to get the experience of competitions. But I think it's really important. The people around you will set your goal for you, and you'll constantly be able to improve that way. With archery, it's, it isn't really about achieving the best of the best. It's just beating yourself day on day.
Mm.
And so the only way to do that is put yourself in that environment in order to see how you're trending.
Of course. Of all the competitions you've done, both international and at home, is there any one particular competition or tournament that stands out for you, that was particularly special for you, or basically your proudest one to date, one that really meant a lot to you?
You mean outside of the Paralympics?
Well, anywhere.
Well, I mean, the Paralympics is one of those things that is never, it's the pinnacle, and exactly. And it's what I was working towards, not because it's a Paralympic Games or particularly, but I've always been very uncomfortable with being misrepresented. And so when I would go and compete before qualifying for games, I'd often be described as a Paralympian. So Kerrie Leonard, Paralympic archer, which is not accurate. And it always made me, or wasn't accurate at the time, and always made me uncomfortable, because there were so many people that I had seen go to Paralympic Games and achieve and represent their countries, and by the people around me misrepresenting me as a Paralympian, that was problematic for me. So going to a games and achieving that title and being able to proudly say that I'm a Paralympian was really important to me. But not having people around to celebrate that and experience that when they were just as pivotal to me getting to those games is something that I'd love to qualify for Paris in order to give that back to people.
Besides archery, do you have any other passions that you follow out there?
Yeah, I do. I've got a lot when you start listing them all out, but the biggest thing I'm interested in is horse racing and breeding racehorses. So that's what I do in my spare time.
Brilliant.
Spare time.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I'm going to throw this one at you. And I suppose maybe in an archery kind of context, where do you see yourself in 5 years' time? Or have you even, is that kind of...
For me, again, it's one of those things that is a difficult one to pinpoint. One of the reasons I've stayed for Paris in particular is to try and get other people with disabilities into the sport. By me qualifying for Tokyo and going, that's great, bye now, see you later, it would mean that I would take a lot of knowledge from the sport and not reinvest that in getting more participation. And so what I would like to see in 5 years' time is participating from that side and getting grassroots para archery much more bedded in the country, because to be honest, it's non-existent. If I was to leave in the morning there, then we'd be waiting another 2008 to 21. We'd be waiting another 13 plus years for someone else to come along. So that's what I would like to be doing.
Okay. And I suppose that's now, I've pretty much asked the bulk of the questions there, and I'm just going to leave it with kind of a very, I suppose, an open one. Is there any area that you want to maybe approach or discuss, or any other aspect you want to kind of maybe touch upon in archery?
Not particularly. Okay. I do think, for quite a while we have been very focused on world archery qualifying standards and making sure that competitions catered to that. I do think that's getting better. I think that we do need to, again, give beginners the opportunity to go to competitions and experience that as a stepping stone to those higher quality groups, because I think that definitely for us as a country, we need to become more competitive. And in order to do that, we're a little bit saturated at the moment, so we need to encourage more archers to come up the ranks. There needs to be the option for experiencing a competitive environment without pushing people out of the sport. And then to that point as well, around getting minorities into the sport, I think sometimes it's very short-sighted, and I say this in a lot of interviews, but it's very short-sighted not to be encouraging minorities such as a disability into your club, because if someone with a disability goes to a club, typically, or actually you see this with children as well, if you get kids into clubs, the parents have to be there. If you have somebody with a disability, they might bring a friend of theirs to make them feel more comfortable, and so you have that multiplier effect, and so you grow the numbers in clubs by encouraging minorities to participate. So I think from my side, if there's some things that I would expand on and build into an ongoing conversation, it would be around how do we get minorities to feel included? How do we drive on beginners to become more committed to the sport and feel like they're being included?
Okay. So, Kerrie, that's that concludes that, and I really, really appreciate you taking the time out to chat to us, and much appreciated. And yeah, so we'll leave it at that, if that's okay with yourself.